Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Another video here. I am curious on who my subscribers are here. So if you're an actual human subscriber, I definitely appreciate a comment of why in the world you subscribe to me, um, and if it's from a video or something else. Um, I've been thinking of maybe posting content that's vaguely political. I know I posted the gun control video a little while ago, which got a little smattering of engagement, but in some ways that's fine. Just getting something I think would be interesting. And in terms of how I spend my time and what I've invested in, I know that I invest in a lot of um, philosophy, politics, history, things like that. And this is what these are sort of some of the things I think about the most. So I thought it might be interesting to sort of, um, establish a presence, I guess, talking about some of these issues. Um, and not to belabor the point, end of announcement section, I guess. I want to talk about the idea of viewing life as an attempt to sort of avoid struggle and why I view that as a tragic thing. Um, and I think I would open up with I was listening to the sort of classic John Piper sermon called "Don't Waste Your Life," which is talking about how there is this. Well, he opens up by talking about how there is a missionary couple who died in the Congo or one of these third world countries, and um, at the age of like 55 or something like that, and he's saying this isn't a tragedy. A real tragedy is um, wasting your life. And he gives the example of like a retirement brochure where um, once you retire, you go to this place, and your dream is to, um, or it's not a retirement brochure. It was a story in Reader's Digest where someone was saying, "I just want to retire and then pick up seashells all the days of my life, on the coast of Florida." And um, he said that's the real tragedy is wasting your life doing something like this. And I think it's also true that it's your life is very much about challenges. Once the challenges are gone, the life is sort of gone, the story sort of ends. Because I mean, if you think of a life that has no challenges, which no struggle or no suffering, I mean, it's hard to know what you would even do that could be meaningful, that doesn't involve any sort of struggle at all. Another like a literary example of this kind of concept would be like The Giver, where um, you have a world where they want to get rid of all the things that are bad, but in doing so, you get rid of all the things that are good too. And just to rabbit trail a little bit, it's sort of like if you get rid of all the bad things, well, you can't have compassion because that's related to suffering. You can't have bravery because that's related to danger, which is related to harm. Um, you can't have perseverance because you can't have the roadblocks and suffering that you have to endure. You can't have endurance. You can't have resiliency. So there's a lot that stands to sort of perish if you get rid of everything that is bad in life and if you try to just live a life that sort of avoids these things. And I think that we are doing this more and more today, where we're really emphasizing just avoiding harm. And you see this in the big emphasis on safety, sort of over everything. And this is emphasized a lot in schools, a lot for liability reasons. Um, And I mean, one good example is the terrible way we talk about relationships because, for almost everyone, I mean, over 90% of people, it seems, want to end up with a lifelong partner, lifelong romantic partner in their life, as well as lifelong, friendships. And, but all of the things that we talk about in schools is just about avoiding bad relationships. So it's like, here are the warning signs of a bad relationship. This is when you should leave. But they never say when you should stay. They never say what makes someone worth keeping. And like I saw this brochure when I was teaching where well, it's not a brochure. It's I guess I'm calling a lot of things brochures today. It was like a worksheet or something where it was saying this is your relationship bill of rights. And it said these things that, first of all, are not your rights. So it would say, like, you have the right to be loved. No, you don't. Because if you have the right to be loved, that means we have an obligation to be your lover, and that's, no one's obligation. And it's certainly not the universe's obligation in general. We also talk about people deserving, everyone deserves to be loved, which is not true. I mean, I think if we're talking about what people deserve, it's mostly negative things, myself included. But at any rate, so all we talk about is how to avoid bad relationships, and we don't actually talk about what would be good to actually lead to human flourishing. What would be good to help you lead a meaningful life and find, a good lifelong partner, because all they want to focus on is avoiding suffering and, avoiding pain and things like that. Um, and sorry, I have like a short outline here. So I see that, and this is sort of related to our emphasis on mental health, because I see that kids and sometimes even adults have this idea of, oh, every so often it's good to take a mental health day. And that consists in high school of giving kids like crossword puzzles or, some sort of diversion, from the usual work. Which, if that's really rare, I don't have much of a problem with that. Um, so the issue I have is when you call that a mental health day, because it doesn't have anything to do with mental health. It's just you relaxing. Mental health should be you confronting your problems. That should be something difficult. Building resiliency and learning not to avoid your problems but to overcome them. And like go back to the relationship example. We don't teach kids to how to overcome and negotiate through problems in relationships. We just teach them what the danger signs are and bad ones, and then, when they should leave. And it's also sort of contributed to our culture of it being very non-committal in relationships. Um, which, I mean, I think everyone, or the vast majority of people, want to be in a relationship that has, commitment and self-sacrifice. And if we're talking about unconditional love, then that definitely is, something like marriage, where you're committed for life. It's not based on a condition of you fulfilling something. So anyway, back to the mental health day. If you want strong mental health, then that doesn't come from avoiding difficult things. It comes from confronting them. So, um, I think it's really a tragedy that we're teaching kids their lives are going to be better just by trying to avoid every bad thing and to reduce risk as much as possible. Um, because I think your life is made more meaningful by a certain balance of risk. In Taoism, there's the idea of yin and yang, and in plain English, we would call this chaos and order. And usually, let me just double check that it's still recording, because I'm recording on a Chromebook right now, so I want to make sure it has sufficient storage. But in plain English, the yin and yang is just chaos and order, and human flourishing um, exists sort of in that divide between order and chaos, because you want to have some order in your life, but you also want to venture out a little bit. You don't want to just stay in the Shire your whole life, which is another good example of coming out of that place of order, the Shire, and then going into a place and having an adventure. Lord of the Rings has good imagery of that. And I was talking to a friend a little while ago about how he'd climb trees as a kid, and sometimes he'd be told not to do it for safety or something like that. And he has in his family, there's other kids that are playing in trees, and he's actually more cautious for them than he was for himself. But he, as we were talking, he recognizes too that, yeah, it might be the case that they fall and get hurt somewhat, but in some ways that's good. You want them to, um, for minor injuries at least, you want them to be able to climb a tree, maybe get hurt, but then they get back up and they're you know uh, exploring again. They're not taught, oh, you fell out of the tree. You see what happened. So now what did we learn? Always stay in the Shire, always stay at home, always stay, and do the safest thing possible. But in reality, it should be, yeah, that's the price of living a meaningful life. You go out and climb trees, have your own adventures. And yeah, there's some, you know, harm or danger or risk involved in that, but your life isn't going to be that much if you just stay at home all day and don't do much. And I think what sorry, let me check my outline again. Um, so I mean, I think when you're an adult, this becomes maybe you go to work that you really don't like because your family needs it or because it's the most wise thing to do. It's the best long-term thing to do. And but you've developed that ability to face difficult things because hopefully as a kid you're taught to sort of push the boundaries a little bit in terms of being able to confront things that are difficult and confront things that involve risk. And another example that I always find interesting myself is in video games. Um, you always want a challenge, even if you go on easy mode. You almost always want a challenge. You want there to be some sort of a challenge. So it's so you can have like a creative mode, but by and large, the overwhelming majority of gameplay involves some sort of difficulty and challenge and overcoming that challenge. And it's always been a really funny thing to me that video games do that because video games are this world where it could be absolutely anything you want, but there's something so inherent in us that wants that sort of tension and resolve, and that specifically wants difficulty, that video games artificially give it to you. Um, and this comes round to there's this passage in The Red Pony by John Steinbeck where he's talking about this old man who is a pioneer who is part of a team that pushed west, and they had all these adventures and battles and stuff doing that. But then when he hits the west coast and he hits the Pacific Ocean, he's just looking at the ocean like, well, now what can we do? And he's just in a conversation with his grandson where he's talking about how all he does is he just looks at the ocean, cursing at that it stops. That that's sort of where his journey ends. And in the book he's sort of just having dinner and eliminated, but that and I mean, I'm not painting the picture like Steinbeck does, but basically what he's painting is this guy's life has just become a matter of sitting around and having dinner and resting and retirement, and it's a sad thing. And I think that today our life, we've become so wealthy in America that um, I mean, I know we aren't perfect and we still have difficult things to get through, but we've resolved so many of our issues and so many of our medical issues where mortality is so much more of a remote threat. And um, this constant threat of suffering or being invaded or starving is so remote for the overwhelming majority of Americans. And obviously that's good, great, and I'm happy for medical advancements and all these things. But there's another thing to consider, which is that there's a sort of challenge that we are missing. There's a sort of difficulty that we benefit from having in life, and I think you also see this new generation of from millennial and Generation Z. And I mean, I don't want to get into memes of like millennials being too oversensitive, but I do think there's a significant concern with um, I guess a lack of fortitude because they're not being tested like they used to in life. I think that life is in some ways too easy. So in school, for things that should not cause that much stress, there's students that are totally depressed and stressed and full of anxiety. And I'm not blaming the students who deal with that, and I'm sure there's some examples that are really severe, but I do think there's a problem with a lack of resiliency that stems from our view of suffering as something to merely avoid and not something to confront. So, and we also view that as this is a rabbit trail. I'll try not to get too much in, but it gets into the idea of mental health and I think our scope of what constitutes mental health is too big because we view people as sort of only materialist when we say any issue you have in your soul or spirit is a mental health issue. Reduce it down to that. Um, and you don't have to buy into the Christian idea of a soul to realize there's something more than just the purely physical being. It's there's there look for instance, there's your philosophy, your life outlook, and I know can be related to mental health, but and mental health is a valuable component to consider in everything. But I think that, like, let me give examples to elucidate what I'm trying to say. So let's say there is um, a person, we'll say it's a teen girl who looks for affection from people for whatever reason, and um, we'll say she's too needy emotionally. So she has friends, but then in her emotional neediness, that she asks too much of them, and then she sort of pushes them away, and then well, that causes her to be lonely, and then that could cause her to be sort of depressed and maybe anxious as well. Have anxiety over the idea of like what made these people push them away and what's wrong with me, um, and in schools today, that would be called a mental health issue. Once a student says depression, even if they're talking to an adult they already confide in and trust, the school says, oh, they need to go to a mental health expert because they're, and I think inherent in that delegation is the idea that, well, this student, anything involving depression is a merely physical thing. And in this instance, it's, actions that led to that. So for this hypothetical student, the issue is, well, let's look at how you're acting and what gives you that need. And, maybe you could change your actions and you'll get different outcomes. And, that could really help the student. And I want to be clear that I'm not trying to say it's never a mental health issue. And there are times to go on medication. I do think people um, they try too hard to destigmatize medication sometimes, like online. I think on Reddit, one of the hive mind things that Reddit believes is like medication is always okay for mental health things, but I think it's always good to prioritize instead first, like, okay, what made you feel this way and what can you do to change that? So, um, so I think that also your philosophy plays a role in things. So, do you view your life as do you, is it a concern for you to live a worthy life, and do you have a sense of like, I want to be the kind of person who can endure these things, or do you want to say I want to live a life where I could just avoid these things? Because I think those are going to get you very different results, and those are more of a philosophical difference. They're not per se mental health. So anyway, I'll try to wrap this up because I know I'm going on for a while, but I hope that especially for our youth or young people, that they could find examples of people who have a more nuanced view of this issue than merely just the sort of trite sayings that people use, like self-care. And you can there's sort of a growing idea that you can never criticize self-care, and that sort of which the whole idea of self-care is it's a little bit like I'm avoiding my issues to just get away from them, which you need a time of rest. But or it's good if you could find a time of rest, but you also there I see a lack of a desire to say I want to be the kind of person who can endure this without needing rest. I want to, and I'm connected to other people, so I want to be the kind of mom who could endure with kids that will annoy me for days on end, but I could still be patient. Or I want to be the kind of man who um, people can depend upon, and even if I don't want to do something, I'll still do it. So, and those are all things involving resiliency, which is sort of the opposite. I mean, I see it in a sense the opposite of what we call now this idea of prioritizing self-care. But anyway, all these things. Like mental health is needed for a worthy life, and philosophy is, and but there's a sort of nuanced view of I think human flourishing that we could get if we don't see things purely as trying to avoid suffering, and if we're able to confront these things more. And I want to, I just am scared that we're going to have a generation of kids that can't find meaning in their suffering. And if you can't find meaning, then it's you're not going to be able to cope with it. So, and I think that the reason that there's less of a willingness to do that is because we're treating struggles and suffering not as indicators that something is wrong, but we're just trying to seek sort of an immediate band-aid coping mechanism. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what thoughts people have whoever watch this. I'm actually probably more curious on just who in the world is watching this, but those are my thoughts um, on this issue. Not that anyone asked.